What's going on? My name is Carter Rabassa, and I'm the head of DevRel at Courier. Courier is an API that makes it easy for developers to send multi-channel notifications. So whether it's SMS, email, push notifications, we've totally got you covered. You can find me on Twitter at CRTR0, and I'm here to give a talk about a really fun app that me and my buddy Mike built. Here's Mike.
Hi.
Mike is our head of SDK engineering, and we recently, Courier launched a new product called Inbox. In the past, people had used Courier to send notifications. So if you're building a product and you need to send emails, SMSs, notifying users of important things that are happening inside your software, you could use Courier to do that. Inbox is a product that application developers can use to embed inbox and toast experiences inside of their web or mobile applications. And we had a web inbox SDK for a little while, and recently we launched iOS and Android SDKs for Inbox. So one of the things about building inboxes into your software is that it actually, including any kind of widget or component, people are very sensitive to having those things look and feel like native parts of their application. So whether it's think of software that you use like LinkedIn or Notion or Figma. It's important that those notification and inbox experiences not feel foreign, that they match the branding, that they match the look and feel. When we were designing the SDKs for Inbox, we took great pains, Mike took super great pains to make sure that these inboxes were as customizable as humanly possible. Then, as we were about to launch Inbox, sometimes it's just really fun to build sample applications to show developers what is possible. And because Inbox is so customizable, we started to imagine how can we push the limits of Inbox? What could be the farthest thing from a modern inbox experience that would show developers just how flexible and customizable Inbox is? So Mike, super creative guy, very product and design focused. One of the first things that he thought of was Instagram. What if we could use Inbox to clone Instagram? That would be pretty wild, right? It would really illustrate how customizable and flexible this thing is. However, I have young children and I have some negative associations with social media, in particular Instagram. So I was sort of trying to think look, that's a great idea, Mike, but what can we build that makes people feel good instead of bad about themselves? And just about the time that I was having these ideas and these thoughts, my dog Otto came up and gave me those puppy dog eyes and asked me for a walk. And in that flash of a moment, Puppygram was born. So Puppygram, which I'm sort of showing you a sneak peek of on the right, is an Instagram clone that exclusively shows you pictures of super cute dogs and puppies. It has exactly what you think of Instagram having, infinite scroll, lots of cute pictures, fun ChatGPT generated descriptions, and it updates every minute. So every minute, you're going to get a fresh picture of a cute dog in your feed. So that's what we decided to build, and this talk is all about walking you through all of the technical decisions and the code that we made to bring Puppygram to life. So this is a diagram that illustrates, an architectural diagram that illustrates how Puppygram works. So in the center of this diagram is our Puppygram server. This is going to be the heart of Puppygram, and we're just using Next.js. Next.js is a full stack JavaScript web framework. But there's a couple other things that I want to walk you through. The first thing I want to talk about is the random dog API. So as we came up with this idea, we needed to get cute pictures of dogs. I actually tried to use Flickr at first, and use the Flickr API to search for images of dogs. And I learned the hard way that Flickr is a bit of a cesspool of questionable content, let's just say. So that was kind of a bummer, but luckily Mike is a super resourceful guy and he discovered the random dog API. You can go check out this API at random.dog. It is a free open source API, and it has a few endpoints that I'll share with you. There's a /woof endpoint that just returns some plain text with the random image of a dog stored on their servers. So I can reload this endpoint and I can get random file names. It also has a /woof.json endpoint, same thing, just formatted as JSON. Usefully, it has an endpoint called doggos that returns the entire contents of their database in JSON format. When we decided to build this application, we knew that we were going to want to send the users of Puppygram a new picture every minute. We didn't want to DDoS this API by calling it once a minute. So this endpoint was really useful. We were able to download all of the names of the files for the puppies, and then and thus really avoid making any API requests when you're using the application. So that was pretty great. The next part of our application is, well, we needed to be able to call our web application once a minute. If you've done development for a while, like, you might initially think to yourself, like, oh, that kind of sounds like a cron job, right? And that's exactly like what we wanted to set up. We wanted to set up effectively a cron job that would call our web app once a minute in order to send this notification. It turns out that there's a fantastic service called Ingest that does this. One of the things that I really like about Ingest is that it's a cloud-based product that lets you sort of create jobs and workflows, but it allows you to keep all of your code on your own server. There are other workflow products that require you to sort of package and upload your code to their servers, and then they will execute your code, based on the workflow that you set up. What I like about Ingest is that you keep all of the code on your server in your web application, and instead they use webhooks. They use webhooks to call back into your web application on the schedule that you define. And that's exactly what we did in order to create Puppygram. So kind of walking through the flow one last time before we dive into the code, we need to invoke our endpoint once every minute, and we use ingest for that. When we invoke the endpoint, we need to write a little bit of code to fetch a random image of a dog. And then finally, we use Courier to send the notification with the image of the dog and some other metadata that's going to allow Mike to create like the full Puppygram experience on the iOS application. So cool. Well, so let's dive into the code. So this is a 95% just basic Next.js application. When you use the Next.js npx command, it will scaffold all of the files that you see here on the left. So really, like, all we had to create were a few data files. So we have a few JSON files that contain information about the dog images and some descriptions and some Twitter handles. And then really the only other thing we had to do was create the API route that Ingest is going to use to call our web application. So the way that you do this in a Next.js app is you can create a route. In this case, we created a directory called API. We then create another subdirectory called ingest. And then inside that subdirectory, we need to create a file called route.js. It has to be named route.js. That signals to Ingest that this is going to be a server-side function that we're going to be defining. And that's basically it. So in this single file, we do all the work that we need to do to get the random picture of the dog and make the call to Courier. And I'm going to walk you through all of that right now. So there's a bunch of stuff we import at the top, but really there's three things. I mean, we import the Courier client. The Courier client is what we use to make REST API calls to Courier. The next thing that's really worth noticing is we import the ingest client. So the ingest client is what we're going to use to sort of wire up our web application to the ingest cloud, and also define exactly when we want this function to be called. And then the rest of the stuff that we're including are just those JSON data files that I showed you earlier. So scrolling down, these few lines of code right here are exactly how you use the ingest client to both create a function and then register the function with ingest. And you'll notice right here is where we specify how often we want ingest to call us using completely standard cron syntax. So those 5 asterisks just mean once a minute. Down here, the code is relatively straightforward. We're going to get a random element of our array of doggos. There's an Easter egg in here that you're free to check out if you dig into the source code. You might it was my fun way of injecting a photo of Otto into this into Puppygram. But yeah, we get a random dog image. We're going to get a random Twitter handle, so that once again, when you see the iOS app, you're going to see that every post is associated with someone's username. So we're going to get a random handle, and then we're going to get a random puppy description. Down here, this is the meat of what you need to do as a developer to send a notification using Courier. So we're going to call courier.send, and when you send notifications to Courier, there's a few high-level properties that you define that kind of tell Courier what you want to do. The first thing that you need to define is, hey, who's receiving the notification? Who's it going to? When you build your software, this is almost certainly going to be a dynamic value. You know, you're going to send a notification to Mike. You're going to send a notification to Carter. In this case, this app it's basically a public inbox. Like, everyone who's using Puppygram is getting the same notifications. So in this case, we're setting the user ID to this static value that is an environment variable. But in your case, it'll be dynamic based on who you really want to send your product notifications to. The next thing we need to do is say, well, what is the content of the notification? Normally, you'll see right here under content, we have a title property, and then we're setting it to an empty string. Because we're kind of bastardizing Courier inbox to build Puppygram, we don't need to send a title. But when you're using Courier to send emails or push notifications, you will set a title. If you're sending an email, the title will be the subject. If you're sending a push notification, the title will be the title of the push notification. But in our case, it's going to be empty. The next thing we're going to specify is body. In the context of an email, the body will be the body of the email. In the context of inbox, it'll be the body of the notification. And in this case, we're going to send that random description of a dog that we use ChatGPT to generate. Here, we're specifying another property called elements. So Courier has a JSON syntax that allows developers to build pretty complicated notification content that is sort of channel agnostic. So you can use this JSON syntax to build out a very complicated bit of notification content that will look one way on an SMS and a different way on an email. And that's what we're doing right here. Right here, we're creating something called an action. We're specifying that the user should click to view, and then we're specifying the URL of the image as the href for this action. Down here, this is optional, but this is an important part of how many people use Courier to send notifications. There's a property called data. Data is completely customizable.
Can you pause for a second? Sorry, I know that's going to make this sound. Okay.
No worries. So data is completely customizable. Like, you can use this data property to send Courier any data that you want. It can be, in this case, we're sending an image URL and a username. So the fields that we're sending in data, we're using it to construct what the user is going to see in the notification. But you can also send all kinds of metadata in the data field that just supports important aspects of like how your application works. And then finally, we need to specify some routing information. This just means we need to kind of tell Courier like how to route this notification, because there are actually like lots of interesting things you can do with Courier. Like, Courier supports multicasting. Like, you could decide that you're going to send a notification, but you want to send an email and an SMS and a push notification because the notification is very, very urgent. Like, maybe your server has gone down. In that case, the routing method, the value of method would be set to all. In this case, we only want Courier to send to a single destination. So we're going to set the method to single. And in this case, we're only going to use the inbox channel, but it's easy to add channels to this array. So we could include SMS, we could include email if we wanted to send to multiple channels. But in this case, we're not doing those things. We're just going to send to the inbox. And that's all there is to it. As soon as this API call is completed, Courier has what it needs to deliver the notification to our iOS app. So now I'm going to turn it over to Mike, and Mike is going to walk you through how he built the iOS app and how he brought Puppygram to life on the client.
Hi, I'm Mike. What we're going to show you here is how we take all of that backend infrastructure that's now routing out these inbox messages with some custom data in it. We're going to add that to SwiftUI iOS app, and then we're going to show all these cool pictures of dogs on screen. So this is the iOS SDK repo. Supports SwiftUI and all kinds of other cool things. So we're going to focus on two key pieces of the mobile SDK for iOS in particular. Those pieces are authentication, so you can sign your user in and sign your user out. This really allows Courier to keep track of a user ID in your app, and we can send messages to that user ID, the same user ID that Carter just went over a little bit ago. And the other feature is the inbox itself. And here are some docs about the inbox in case you're curious. Now I'm going to show you what the basic version of the inbox looks like. Here's our Puppygram, but really inbox is kind of intended to look closer to a notification feed, as we talked about. And a basic notification feed is probably going to look something like this. The mobile SDK allows you to customize it a bit or style it. So here are some example styles, but we really want access to that raw data because we're sending very custom information and we want to make it look super different than what the out-of-the-box styles and views really look like. So here's a look at really what we get. We get a bunch of raw JSON that we can do whatever we want with. And really, Puppygram is just taking that raw JSON, adding some custom UI to it, and showing it on screen. And here's our end result. There's also some other functionality we did, which I'll go over later, but you can double tap to like an image. Oops, scroll down. You can see we got a new image in here because a new image is coming every minute, as we talked about a bit ago. So you can double tap to like. You can also double tap to unlike. And I'll go over all those pieces later, but another feature is the ability to paginate or grab new images when you reach the bottom, infinite scroll. So here you can see it's loading and eventually new images of dogs come in. So I'll scroll back up to the top here and break down the key pieces of the Puppygram iOS app. So this is a SwiftUI app. For those unfamiliar with SwiftUI, it's kind of a new way to make iOS apps, pretty similar to something like React. And what we do really to begin with is we just install the Courier iOS package. You can grab the package by getting the URL from the repo and following the step-by-step guide to add the package. We have a nice video if you're curious about it. And then we're gonna basically just do the authentication, then wire up the inbox, then show some stuff on screen. So here is the authentication piece. What we do right here is we just sign the user in with some credentials. These credentials you can find in the Courier Studio. You'll need, the big piece here is you'll need a client key, but also an access token. There's information in the docs about these things. I'm not going to go over those right now because they're not super critical, but there's other resources available when you're curious. And then we're going to sign the same user ID in that Carter was using right here. So once that's done, what really happens is the app just kind of handles a little bit of the state where it's loading and signing the user in. And then if the user is signed in, then we show this feed view. And I'll go over the feed view here. So the feed view contains a handful of state variables. These are very similar to like use state that you see in React. And there are equivalents for Android or React Native or Flutter. But in SwiftUI, it's just an at state variable. And there's really one big state variable that we're going to pay attention to in particular for this demo. And that's going to be the messages variable. When we set the messages, it will update the whole UI of the screen and do something with that information if we want it to. So what we really do here is, and I'll scroll down just a little bit here. What we really do here is when this main content view appears, the body, then we wait and call a function on appear, and we register what we call an inbox listener. An inbox listener is Courier mobile SDK's way of listening to all of the changes that happen to the inbox. If you use our pre-built UI, this is really just underneath the hood, but we want to make it available to all of you so that you can build whatever experience you want. Again, most of you will probably do some sort of notification feed, but in our case, we're doing pictures of dogs. And there are 3 callbacks that happen here. Initial loading one, so you can show some sort of loading indication. In our case, we show that skeleton screen, like the loading animation. An error state, in case like your user wasn't signed in, or maybe there was a bad internet connection or something underneath that might have not gone exactly according to plan, and you can show an error state to your users. And an on messages changed listener, like a callback here that has all the information about all of the messages that the inbox has access to. We're gonna take those messages, which contain all that information that Carter's been sending out every minute, and we're going to download all of the images from that image URL data key value that he showed a little bit ago. And we're gonna download that image and cache it to the device. And this piece in particular is important because this allows us to show it on screen with a really nice aspect ratio. If you navigate Instagram, for example, it's not just showing you a bunch of images that are the same size, they actually show you images based on the size of their aspect ratio. And when you scroll through on Instagram, you'll notice that the images are downloaded right away, so you can see them. There are some ways that we could make this more performant, but this at least gets us the UI that we're trying to create. And then from here, once we've downloaded all the images, we'll just set the message variable to the message state variable that I talked about a little bit ago to the messages. And that will update the UI. Now I'll scroll up to what we do with those messages. From here, in our UI, we have a list, and inside of that list, we just loop over all of those messages, and we create what we call a dog list item. In that list item, if I go to that, that takes in 2 pieces. Those constructor pieces are the message itself and a size that just allows us to size the UI a little nicer so it looks nice. And that eventually breaks down all the things needed to create these list items here. And you can see me scrolling the list items. Yeah, so at this point, like, we've really created most of the UI, but just to go a little bit further and show you that we can actually write to this data as well from the client, or we can like an image from the SDK, we extended one of the other features of the SDK to support this functionality. So in the Courier inbox, we allow you to mark a notification as read. This is pretty similar to if you were receiving a bunch of emails and you click on an email in the mail app. That email that you just clicked on is no longer unread. It's read at that point, and it changes its state slightly. So what we did is we took that same functionality behind the scenes, the mark it as read or mark it as unread, and that's how we like the images. So when I actually double tap an item here and I like it, we just mark it as read. So I'm able to remember the state of that image as I scroll through and scroll all the way back, and you can see that it looks like it's liked, and it feels like you would expect. And then on the inverse of it, you can mark something as unread just by clicking the like button again. Very similar to unliking an image. So that's pretty much it. Pagination is another thing that you can do with the SDK. I went over it a little bit ago. It automatically handles most of it just by scrolling down. You can adjust some variables there. And there's quite a few other little knickknacks and things that you can use to extend more functionality from your app. We recommend that you go to the documentation to check out more about Inbox itself. You can see that at the URL that's on the screen right now. And if you don't want to listen to any of us talking about all this stuff, you can go to the blog right here, also URL on screen, and read it for yourself.
Bye.
Bye.